This episode includes open conversations about mental health, including bipolar disorder and depression. Please listen in the way that feels most supportive to you.
Well, I think the most challenging part is that when one goes through any kind of mental health issue, there is a tendency to look at it as a personality issue, to say that so and so is moody or so and so has mood swings, or to attribute it to any challenges in their immediate environment. No, I think at that time I just wanted to be so-called normal, right? I just definitely didn't want to have the label as I saw it of being bipolar. I think it's quite different amongst some sections of young people today where they might openly say is, I have ADHD or I'm depressed or I'm bipolar. Social media makes life very difficult in terms of identity and validation and self-worth and also just the constant pressure of social media all the time. I think there was a point along the way that I was, almost considering taking my own life because I just didn't think I was so successful.
Welcome back to Be Anomalous. I'm Sai Menon, and today's episode is about redefining success, not as something you chase, but something you learn to choose on your own terms. My guest today is Aparna Piramal, a writer, educator, former CEO, and mental health advocate whose work sits at the intersection of leadership, design, and lived experiences. Aparna grew up in Mumbai, studied at Oxford and Harvard, and became a CEO in her 20s. And from the outside, lived a version of success many people are taught to aspire to. But what makes this conversation different is her honesty. In this episode, Aparna gives us an unfiltered inner look at what it actually feels like to chase success that isn't aligned with who you are, and the quiet, difficult work of redefining it in a way that is sustainable, humane, and deeply personal. She is the author of Working Out of the Box, where she explores leadership not through big wins, but through everyday habits, decisions, and how we show up to work. And she's also the author of Chemical Khichdi, a best selling memoir where she writes candidly about living with bipolar disorder for over 2 decades and how mental health, when understood rather than hidden, can reshape how we live, work, and lead. In this conversation, we talk about the pressure of living by the outer scorecard. What happens when success costs you your well being? How mental health is often misread as a personality flaw, and why choosing success on your own terms can be the most radical decision you make. This episode isn't about doing more, it's about doing what's true to you. So let's get into it.
Hi, Aparna. Welcome to Be Anomalous. Thank you so much for doing this. So, before we get started, can you introduce us? Who is Aparna?
That's a great question. I think people can spend a whole lifetime trying to answer that question, Sai, but I'll attempt it in short. So I just would describe myself as a writer and somebody living with bipolar disorder, living in Mumbai. I'm a mother of two teenage boys and somebody who is very curious and who likes and loves exploring the intersection between different issues. And that's what I've been doing for a long time as a writer and as a journalist. I worked in business before that. So somebody who's had a very hybrid past, working and living in different countries, working in different industries, working in different sectors, and always holding on to a sense of curiosity about them. So I think that would be me in a nutshell.
That's amazing. The first thing that you said, did you always want to be a writer?
I think I lived in denial for the longest time, actually, I would say, because I grew up in a business family and, we were encouraged to work in the family business, which is what I did for a long time. And I think actually for a long time, I assumed that being in business and being in, entrepreneurial, running a company was really a more of a worthy occupation than being a writer, perhaps. Even though my mother is a writer and has been a business historian and has written many books and been a journalist too, but it was always seen as the lesser of the professions compared to being in business. So I think I needed to work that out in my head for a long time. I always enjoyed writing though, but I never really thought of it as a profession until much later.
Was that something that you found it later in your life that that's something that you could do?
Yes, I mean, I actually turned to writing when I was pregnant with my first child, and I had some time off. And I started writing columns in a newspaper at that time, it was on design and workplace design and business. And from then on, it evolved to being a profession and then moving towards books. And now I'm fully immersed in that space. So, yeah, loving it.
You also said as your identity as bipolar disorder as one of your identity. How how has that journey been to accepting that as part of who you are?
Yeah, so I've lived with bipolarity now for 26 years. I mean, since I was 24. So it's been a really long time, and there have been a lot of periods of ups and downs. But I'm happy to say that for nearly the last decade, there's been really almost no incidences of the extreme mood swings that characterize bipolar disorder. So none of the mania that was there previously. So it's been pretty intense as a journey, and I think the most challenging part possibly was the acceptance, as you said. That I think that initially, going back now 25 years, there was just an unwillingness on everyone's part to accept that this is a medical condition, that it needs treatment, that it might need medication, that I would need to seek psychiatric help. So all of these were issues that we confronted early on. But it took us a long while, over a decade, for us to have that acceptance, actually.
How would you say your childhood was, or how has that evolved you as a person?
Well, I think childhood influences all of us in ways that we find out perhaps in much later life also. But I would say that, we grew up in a joint family. There were a lot of kids in the house. We spent a lot of time playing together. One of the big features of my childhood was my school, and the second thing really was the horse riding that I used to do outside school. And I think these were really formative experiences for me as a kid. I think the horse riding really taught me a lot about taking risk and being brave, because I was always afraid of falling off, and yet I wanted to ride. So it was a combination of wanting to ride, but also knowing that I might fall off at any point, which I did many times. And the school was great fun. It was the most impactful experience in my life. It was transformational. It was called the JB Pettit High School for Girls in Mumbai. And it was just a really, really fun place to be, very creative, very free, very spontaneous. So we had a fantastic time at that school.
So you always focused in business at that time.
No, I mean, at that time at school, I was at high school at that level. I was a very creative person. I was always writing at that stage. But at that time, we hadn't that was when we were just teenagers. We hadn't really focused on a career then. But I did assume that since I had the option of working in the family business, that was going to be likely. But I also did when I was in college, I did a lot of internships with the media also, because that was something I was interested in even back then.
Did you have any signs of mental health disorder at that point while growing up, or any
No,
like
it
first
started.
signs?
No, I don't think so. I think my first brush with mania was when I was 24. So nothing really when we were younger.
How would you explain that, like now that you know what you're diagnosed with, but at that point, or for someone who is going through something similar and is undiagnosed, how would you explain that process for them?
Well, I think the most challenging part is that when one goes through any kind of mental health issue, there is a tendency to look at it as a personality issue, to say that so and so is moody, or so and so has mood swings, or to attribute it to any challenges in their immediate environment. So, for example, if there's any trouble in the family of any sort, or if there are some pressures of any sort due to academia. I mean, we always want to attribute it to a certain reason. And I think what's important to understand is that if you have a diagnosis from a trustworthy person and you accept that, that it could actually make life a lot simpler. Because what you're saying then is not that your personality has a flaw in any way, but that you're dealing with a medical condition that would require diagnosis, would require treatment. And then you can actually have a plan for the way forward rather than constantly being reacting and responding to whatever else that's happening to you. So I know that there are a lot of tendencies for people to diagnose themselves, and to say that I'm like this and I'm like that. But I think I'd stay away from that. And I'd say that if you are really experiencing mental health challenges, you should go to a professional who can diagnose you.
The first episode you said was at 24. At that point, you were at Harvard, right?
Mhm.
So, do you think being in a different country sort of made it a different experience for you, being versus being in India?
I mean, I don't think there was anything about the Harvard environment that triggered the mania or anything like that. Definitely, when I was at Harvard for a large chunk of it, when I was doing my MBA at the business school, there were a lot of times which I would say I was quite down, and I, could possibly have been depressed also. And it's quite difficult when you are away from family, for anyone to understand exactly what's going on, because the people around you don't know you that well. You're not, there are also people just your own age, they may not be able to pick up on these things. And the faculty also may not know you that well. So that's the challenge when you're living by yourself or you're away at school, or you're in a different country, is that the people who know you the best are not seeing you all the time. So they're not fully able to understand what exactly is going on. And I think that was part of the challenge at HBS. But I also think it was an opportunity for me to, really learn to enjoy my own company. And I think it was an area, those 2 years of my life where I definitely learned to be more resilient and more independent. So I don't, in retrospect, assign any kind of, I have no regrets about any of it. So.
Um, and also, the mental health awareness is different in both the countries, right? Or how has that been, or what have you experienced through your journey?
So I think it's the mental health landscape is changing, and it really depends where you are and which city you are in, what kind of care you have, what sort of family dynamics there are. So I think that there are parts of India which there's a lot of mental health awareness. There are different parts where there are less. It's also a generational thing that I think that younger people tend to be more aware of it, more willing to talk about it. And with the older generations, there's more resistance perhaps to talk about it. So I think when I was at HBS, for example, I did meet with the care team, the mental health team while I was there, but they didn't feel at that time that my that bipolarity was sufficiently obvious that I needed to start medication immediately. So there was a lot of question at that time, or was it a borderline case, or am I really bipolar, am I really not, which typically does happen initially when, if the symptoms are not too obvious, if it takes some time for it to develop. So uh, I think there can be ambiguity wherever you are, that's what I'm trying to say. And there can be a lot of awareness. I wouldn't simplify and say that, US has more mental health awareness, India has less mental health awareness. I think it depends where you are.
Journey. Okay. So at that point, when you're going through, people questioning that, how do you kind of go through questioning what you're going through? Because when the professionals are also not able to diagnose you correctly, how do you kind of justify the feelings that you experience?
No, I think at that time I just wanted to be so-called normal, right? I just definitely didn't want to have the label as I saw it of being bipolar. I think it's quite different amongst some sections of young people today, where they might openly say is, I have ADHD, or I'm depressed, or I'm bipolar. Like that was not the feeling that I had when I was, dealing with this. I didn't want that label at all. So I was just trying to understand what was happening to me. And I really turned to psychotherapy as a way of understanding why I was feeling what I was feeling, to look at it from the lens of psychology and therapy rather than medication necessarily. So that was my initial response to this condition.
Um, so from like moving from India to US, how has the culture part of it like shaped you? And you said that you've lived in multiple countries, even Oxford. So how has the culture shaped you uh, and your identity?
Yeah, I mean, hugely. You talked about also living in different countries yourself. So I grew up in India till I was about 16. And then from the age of 16 to about 25, 26, I lived between India, the US, and the UK, studying and working in these three different places. And I think that what it does is that it's usually enriching to be able to be immersed in different cultures and to be able to absorb them. I think that also kind of creates a bit of a feeling of the insider outsider, that you're sort of inside, not fully inside the culture, you're not fully outside the culture. So that I think there was always that feeling, because I left India when I was quite young, but then I came back to work, then I went back again, and so there was a lack of continuity. But I think overall, what it's left me feeling is how many more similarities there are between people rather than differences. And particularly for me, the UK has been like a second home. I've got a family there. I've got very close friends there. I keep going back there. So I think I would regard it as a privilege to be able to travel between cultures, even if sometimes there is a little bit of that feeling of, being the insider outsider.
Um, what made you want to write your book, Chemical Khichdi, and why that name?
Yes. Why the name? So let me explain the name. So Chemical Khichdi is my book, which talks about my 20-year-old journey of living with bipolarity. It talks about my journey itself, but it's also a self-help book which lays out a pathway for those who are living with mental health conditions, or their caregivers, their friends, or other people in their network, anybody who wants to understand this condition a bit better. And it's the reason for the title was that it's a khichdi, as some of us might know, is it has many meanings. It means it's something that we eat when we're unwell, so it has like a healing quality to it also. But also khichdi means like a mess or a mix up. And so chemical khichdi is just a very playful term saying that there are chemicals in the brain that have a little bit of mess up going on every now and then. And this is how we deal with it, and this is how we heal it. It could also be, the mix of strategies that we need to employ to make this whole chemical khichdi work. So that's what the book title is about. And why I wanted to write it, I think, for me, writing has always been very therapeutic. And writing is really how I make sense of the world around me and how I make sense of what I'm going through. So it gives me a lot of clarity to be able to write. And when I actually got my first diagnosis, which was back in 2013, I had written out a short essay for myself and for my circle, saying these are 10 things I've learned about being bipolar. And my book club at that time particularly thought that this could turn into a book, and they were very encouraging. And so that's way back in 2015 is when I thought that this could turn into something bigger. And yeah, I've always wanted to write it because I think it's helpful for me to be able to share the story, but I also thought that other people might benefit from it too. Which is, touchwood, what's happened is that a lot of people have read it and have reached out to me like you. And it's led to a lot of conversations. So it's I think it was for both for me and for the wider world that I wanted to write it.
Was there any resistance in the beginning when you were, because you've been very open in your book, you've been open about every personal journey that you've gone through, including your family and everything. Was there any part of you that was resisting not to share certain aspects of it, or about judgment or any of those kind of things?
So, like I said, this book club was really helpful to me because they were very non-judgmental. And actually, my book club had a lot of Western women in it at that point who were used to reading memoirs. And I think memoirs like this are quite well understood in the West. It's a fairly well-developed genre. It's less so in India. But the resistance was not so much from my own concerns, but my family were worried about how writing something like this would be for my mental health. That would it trigger me in any way? How easy would it be to write? And suddenly it wasn't easy to detach from some of the material early on. And even though, like I said, I wanted to write it in as far back as 2015, I only really started writing it in 2020. So I needed that time to detach from the material because I was still having mood swings. And I think once I realized that I could get some distance from the material and write it, then it became a lot easier for me to be able to share it. So my family had their concerns about whether or not I would be stable while writing it, and how open, and also perhaps concerns about being open. Some of my doctors were totally against it. Like they were not encouraging at all of it. And even some friends said that, you can write the book, but just make like a few copies that you want to give to friends. There's no reason to publish it. So I think there was some, resistance to all of that. But for me, it really felt like a very personal mission that this is something I absolutely have to do in my life. So I just followed that instinct, and I'm glad I did. So.
Yeah, I'm glad you did too. It's hard to kind of go against so many no's and so many people telling you not to do something, um, especially, feeling like that feeling of judgment or whatever that could be. Uh, but you're very brave, and I think one of the things that the the book also mentioned from one Harvard professor was that it's extremely brave to be able to talk about your personal journey,
Yeah,
especially with mental health.
but I also had people really encouraging me to do it. So while I had a lot of people who might were skeptical about it, there were a lot of people who were absolutely encouraging me. So I just went with the people who were absolutely encouraging me.
Encouraging and positive. Yeah. So, how has that journey been for you in terms of finding your support system? You mentioned in the book about, from your husband to your sister to your mother, and also, living with bipolar with your family members. How does that affect, and how has that affected you?
Yeah, I think it's been a tough time for them. I mean, that's probably a question you should also ask them, is how
Yeah.
they've responded and how they felt about the whole thing. But I think that they're definitely happier that I'm in a stable place. I'm definitely happier I'm in a stable place. But I think I've been very fortunate with my immediate support system, not just my immediate family, but also a lot of close friends, and a lot of wider circle also. Like the book has interviews with, I think, as many as 50 to 60 people from my circle. So they've also seen me go through this, and these would include friends, colleagues, mentors, gurus, medical practitioners. So a wide range of people I spoke to get their thoughts on it. But yeah, I think there have been some pretty hairy times, and I think it's a lot better. The challenge for me now, being in remission, is also it's not that mood swings go away, but just learning to manage them, and making sure that I'm on top of my thoughts, and it's not that my thoughts and emotions are on top of me. So that is still a practice, and that is a daily challenge. Some days are better than others, but it's something that it's a practice that I've had to learn over the years of living with this, because it just doesn't go away. I mean, I think there's a tendency to think that once you stopped having mood swings, it just sort of all goes away, but that's not the case.
In your TED talk, you mentioned about how you would, while talking about this openly, how it would affect your kids. And it was the opposite of what you expected. The kids from your son's class reached out to you and wanted to talk more about it. So tell us a bit about the younger generation, and also how it has been for your kids. And you're also a professor, so you're sort of surrounded by the younger generation, and
Yeah.
such ways?
Yeah, I think that, I think at one level, uh, I don't think it's very easy being a young person now compared to what it was in the 90s for me. I think that social media makes life very difficult in terms of
Mm.
identity and validation and self-worth, and also just the constant pressure of social media all the time. Like I think though that does make life more challenging. Also, I think the economic situation, the geopolitical situation, the environmental situation means that there is more of a sense that the world is going to blow up at any point,
Mm.
compared to when we were growing up. It makes the job situation more precarious. So these are certain factors that bring in what I see as a residual layer of anxiety amongst younger people that I don't think we had in the same way. Um, but I also think that young people are also quite more, many of them very self aware, very connected, and they have the possibility, to advocate for themselves in ways possibly that we didn't. So I think it's a mixture of things, but. Parenting has changed also a lot in that time, and I would say that yeah, I mean, I do get like a lot of you know questions from parents about their kids, from young kids themselves, and I think that's part of the attempt of doing something like Khichdi, that it helps people understand that there's hope. And especially if you're young and if you've got a diagnosis or something like bipolar, I think my message to the younger people is really to feel that this is something that can be managed. It doesn't mean that you have to compromise your life in any way. You can have a great family life, you can have a social life, you can have a career. It's just, it is not easy to manage, but it definitely can be managed, and you can have that kind of life that you always wanted to. I mean, that is definitely the message of hope that I would want to give to young people who are living with this kind of condition.
What advice would you have for people around, or in terms of empathy? What can someone who is dealing with that get from the outside world, or like how can we be more empathetic towards people?
Yeah, I think that, well, empathy is often just about listening and being available.
Mm.
And I think that when I'm going to talk to a friend, I'm not necessarily asking them to tell me what to do. I'm not asking for judgment. I'm not asking for instruction. I'm not asking for guidance. I'm simply being asked to be listened to be held in a safe space, to be, for someone to be available when they needed it, that kind of thing. And I think I've been really fortunate with a lot of my friends that that's what they've done. I call them what my daily download friends. I can download on daily, and they also download on me. But I think it's more important to have daily download friends than it is to have the 2 a.m. friends who you'll call in a crisis, because you probably very few people will turn you away in a crisis. But to have people who are available to you every day whenever you need to, and you're also responding to them is very important, I think.
Yeah, that's rare. So what led you to write Working Out of the Box? And uh, yeah, why that project?
Yeah, so I actually, was working in my family's office furniture business many, many years ago. And I always felt when was working there right after I graduated from business school that the CEOs were speaking one language and the designers were speaking another language. And I wanted to put together some writing that could combine the perspective of the CEO and combine the perspective of the designers. And that's how that column emerged, because I wanted to write in a newspaper. And I first started doing case studies with a friend of mine who's an architect, and then this slowly evolved into this column where we said, let's put people at the heart of what we do, and let's understand why leaders behave the way they do. What can we tell about a person from the space they're in, and let's try and explore these connections between workspaces and work styles. And I did that for a long time, I think for close to 15 years. and I featured about over 100 CEOs from in India mainly, some from abroad, but across all sectors, from startups to professionals to founders to owners, promoters, really a very wide variety of people. And it was fun. It was interesting.
What was your learning?
I think the big learning was actually, a lot of leadership comes from what we do every day, not from particular acts of excellence. And that is what actually that is what Aristotle had also said, and this is what I saw in practice, that the kind of habits that people have in terms of how they manage their day, how they deal with people, other people, how they handle things like technology, how they handle decision making, how they handle their everyday, is a good indicator of why they're successful and how they're successful and in what way. So we often think a lot of leadership is about, this great strategic thinking or this great strategic act. But I looked at it really as a set of habits, more than these one-time acts that might happen.
So, what were some of the habits that stood out in a bunch of these leaders that were
You know,
common?
I think that they were very, very intentional about their time, how they managed it. They were very intentional about their energies. One of the things that really surprised me was how many of them actually had hobbies that they made time for, and they took that quite seriously. So even people who are working, long days, traveling, who've got a lot of pressure, whether it was fitness or reading or music or spirituality, art, whatever it was, so they were pretty into their how they manage their energies. And I think that they were quite clear about how they make decisions and how they utilize technology to help them with that. So I think that I actually identified a set of parameters in terms of the intangible aspects of working, which is like decision making, relationships, ideas, values, energies. So the acronym for that is DRIVE. And all these intangible aspects really affect your tangible life. How you think about how you manage decisions, how you manage your relationships, where do ideas come from, how do you actually practice values, and what are the energies that you have in your day. These are the things that kind of really feed into what makes you successful and shows up in the tangible markers of success.
What advice would you have for someone with this kind of learning that you've, had? What advice would you have for a young entrepreneur? And also, how has you mentioned about success? How has the definition of success changed for you through the years?
Yeah, these are two great questions. Let's talk about the advice for the entrepreneur. I would say that, I think pay attention to the intangible things that are important to you, that will impact your tangible outcomes. So we're often thinking, we're thinking about the revenues, we're thinking about the fundraise, we're thinking about the financial markers, but think about the things that you need to do to get yourself there. Think about how you make decisions, think about what kind of relationships you have in your life and how those relationships function. Are they purely transactional? Are you investing in them? Think about where your ideas are coming from. Think about what your values are, and think about how do you manage your energies. So I think that when you think about these intangible things, if you think about how you're doing those, then the tangible things uh, take care of themselves, but most people are not very intentional about it. There tends to be this hustle culture when they're only thinking about ideas all the time, or they're only thinking about decisions. They're not thinking about relationships. So I think it's about putting together all these intangibles. That's really important. And about success, I mean, I think that it's a great question because uh, I've realized that, the inner scorecard matters more than the outer scorecard. And I think that lesson took a really long time for me in that making, because I think that we're all brought up to think of outer scorecards of success, whether it's the colleges we go to, the grades we get, the jobs we are, doing. And I think only when I was doing really well until my 30s. because I went off to Oxford and Harvard, and I did well at school, and I was working in the family business. I was a CEO in my 20s, and when I felt, or my family felt, that I wasn't able to do that job, that's the first time I really experienced failure. I really had to confront what success meant to me, and whose scorecard was I living by, because I had clearly failed at living by the scorecard where I was seeking so much validation from out of other people, and I thought this was the most important thing in my life. So I think having understanding, your own inner scorecard, and understanding why you're doing what you're doing and what is it that's actually going to give you a sense of satisfaction. So for me, the scorecard has shifted more from this idea of external success to what I call the idea of craftsmanship. Doing something intrinsically for the sake of excellence, not just for the sake of beating someone else, or getting somebody else's validation. And if craftsmanship could mean crafting a beautiful article, doing some writing really well, having a really good conversation, it may not be something that everyone will see and notice and realize, but it's more intrinsic rather than extrinsic. So I think that's how that success has changed for me. And just to give you one example, I think when we were at HPS, they asked us to write out what the next 10 years could look for us when we were in the second year. So I think I was about 25 then. And I wrote out what could happen to me in my 30s and what I wanted at that time. And then actually at our 10-year reunion, they gave us those letters. And when I opened up the letter, I was completely shattered, because everything I wanted at 25, nothing had come through at 35. And there were people in the room for whom everything had come through. Like whatever they wanted when they were going to graduate, they got it, and they were doing really well at 35. And I was feeling completely shattered by this. But then I did the same exercise when I was 40, using a different set of metrics based on this just really wonderful book called How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen. So I read that book, and he had a set of metrics that he asked us to do. And when I did it at 40, and then I just opened it up recently, now I'm like just turning 50, everything came true. So the point is that, when you start thinking about what your inner scorecard is, and the earlier note that I'd written to myself was very much on an outer scorecard. Mm-hmm. And when I wrote the one later, when I was older, I wrote it based on the inner scorecard. And, I just felt such a great sense of fulfillment. So I think, to answer your question, the long answer is to go from the extrinsic to the intrinsic.
How did you go through that journey? Because, being, how did you kind of define, change that definition for yourself from being shattered to actually being happy with where you are and who you are becoming?
I mean, I think it was very difficult. I think there was a point along the way that I was, almost considering taking my own life, because I just didn't think I was so successful, and that success mattered so much to me. So I had to do a lot of inner work. I did a lot of therapy, but I also did a lot of journaling. I did a lot of reading, and I think I was just very, very persistent in trying to answer this question. I stayed with that question for a long time. I did not say that I'm just going to leave it and come back to it. I keep coming back to it. So I think the journaling was very, very important part of me. The therapy was also very important, but these were really, important practices. And then I found mentors, because I made the switch from business to journalism, and I found a brilliant mentor who helped me make that transition, who guided me after my episodes, who was just always available for me. And I think that gave me the confidence that even though I was starting off something which I wasn't sure had much value compared to what I thought was valuable earlier, but I persisted with it, and it eventually reached a place where I was much happier with myself.
Oh, and why did you want to teach?
Yeah, I think teaching is an extension when you're doing writing and speaking. It's a way of staying connected with young people. It's a way of testing your own ideas to make sure they're good, so that you're not just, writing in a vacuum, but you're actually connecting with people. I enjoyed what I do. I think I did a very fun class. It was called Netflix and the Art of Design Communication and Design Writing. And the whole attempt was to teach young people about design. Young people who are intrinsically more visual, to teach them how to write. And to make the connection between images and words, which is not something that was coming very naturally to them. But it was a really fun course. I taught it for quite a few years. So, yeah.
How has motherhood shaped you?
I mean, you can, that's a whole talk in itself. I think motherhood probably, prepares you for the best and the worst. But I'd say that I'm probably a lot more patient. I'm definitely a lot more patient, probably more empathetic. I think I am kinder to myself because I understand that I'm doing this. I think it's made me prioritize a lot about time, and I think it's a very it is a very joyful and fulfilling role, but it's also definitely tiring also. So that aspect is there.
You said parenting has changed over the years. Like now, what do you think have changed?
So I think parents are, there's all that helicopter parenting and,
Mm.
much more involved in people's lives. I think that let's take these college admissions as an example. I mean, when I applied to college, I'm sure my mother just looked once at my essay maybe, or, and I sent it off without thinking about it. And now there's a whole industry around college admissions and, what parents do and how much parents pay. And so there's parents are like hugely much more involved in their children's lives at one level. At one level, I think that there's a whole section of being a little easier on kids. There's definitely a perception amongst my generation that we were tougher and the youngsters are not so tough and they're not so resilient. And I don't know, I don't think maybe every generation has that
Feeling.
dynamic and that feeling. But certainly, like the kind of involvement that I've had with my kids has been far more than what, even though my parents were hand on, my mother particularly was hands on, but the level of involvement that we have now is a lot more.
Do
So
you think it's because of the social media? And like you mentioned, there's so much access to different things as compared to when, the olden days.
I think expectations of children have changed a lot, and I think parents are part of that, like fueling that. I think the whole life has become so much more competitive that they feel the need to, intervene and shape their children's lives. Children also need it. So I think children are also doing much more with their lives in a way that, and where they need parental involvement to the kind of projects and extracurriculars and other things that they do. So it's a lot more. It's definitely a lot more.
What do you think is the fundamental difference in all the different countries that you've lived in terms of, culture and how all of these topics have, like, whether it's parenting, whether it's mental health, how has it been different? Because you've lived in so many different countries.
Yeah, but the last 20 years I've been living in India. So I think that,
Mostly.
I think mostly it's, more nearly 20 years I've been living in India. But I mean, it's a very macro question. But what I would say is that there are definitely aspects of life which are more global for some people who are privileged enough to be living in more than one country. Then they have a much more global perspective. Um, but of course, there are sort of deep cultural roots in each country, depending on where you come from, on each of these topics. So I don't think you can put one kind of definition on all of these issues.
Uh, so do you think mental health is there's more awareness of mental health now in India?
Yes, it's definitely shifting. It was interesting that there's definitely more topics of conversation. There's more funding for it amongst philanthropists. There's schools and are beginning to prioritize it. Books are being written about it. There was a festival called Manotsav, which has just started, which is in its second year, which is probably the biggest mental health festival anywhere in the world. There are thousands of people attend. That happens in Bangalore. So there's definitely much more awareness in urban India of mental health issues. Being able to access resources is the challenge also. But I think that compared to where it was when I was growing up, I think there's a lot more awareness.
What advice would you have for someone who is struggling with mental health?
Talk to someone. I think it's important to first talk to someone. Don't be ashamed about it. If there's no one in your community that you can reach out to, talk to a helpline if you can, talk to a therapist or anyone you can access. But it's important to talk to someone.
Uh, we always end our conversation with one favorite book and a quote that changed your life.
Favorite book? Well, recently I've been reading The Age of Innocence, which is not related so much to this conversation, but it's a wonderful book by Edith Wharton. But I will say for your viewers, I think the book that really made an impact for me is How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen. And he uses examples from business to talk to people about how they can measure their life. And I think it's a very good book to read. And the quote that I used to say when I was younger, which I'll still say is there in Khichdi, is there is a pleasure in being mad, which few but madmen know.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Aparna, for such a candid conversation and also being so honest about your journey.
That was Aparna Piramal. And what stays with me from this conversation is her honesty, not just about mental health, but about ambition, success, and the cost of chasing someone else's definition of a good life. Aparna reminds us that success isn't just about what you achieve, it's about how you live with yourself while you're achieving it. She talks openly about the outer scorecard we're all taught to chase, the titles, the credentials, the validation, and the moment when scorecard stops working, when the real work begins, the inner work. The work of asking what actually matters to me. What kind of life am I building? And at what cost? If you take one thing from this episode, let it be this. You're allowed to redefine success on your own terms. You're allowed to choose sustainability over spectacle. And you're allowed to build a life that prioritizes your mental health, your energy, and your sense of self. If this conversation resonated, I encourage you read Aparna's book, Chemical Khichdi and Working Out of the Box, and sit with the question she invites us to ask. And if you're struggling, please know this. Talking to someone is not a weakness. It's the beginning of care. Thank you for listening. If this episode moved you, share it with someone who needs it. And as always, being different isn't the obstacle, it's the way forward. So be bold, be real, and be anomalous. I'll see you next time.